I'm a 21-year-old female, and this story took place when I was around 11. I remember this day clearly because it was the first time I was ever allowed to walk to school and back by myself. Up until the age of 14, I lived in what we thought was a safe place in Shaka County, New York. Everyone knew everyone. If you thought you'd get away with something, then you better be prepared to have your ear abused by the time you got home. There was this one day, though. It was a cold winter day and school unfortunately was still open. So all the neighborhood kids had to walk through knee-high inches of snow just to get to school. It took me longer to leave the house as I was used to walking with my older sister to school since she knew the routes better than me. I always used to make fun of her for being paranoid and taking a different route every day from school, but I learned that was what saved my life. As I was waiting by the door to leave, my mom came up to me and told me that I should ride with her to drop me off because my sister was too sick to go today. Being a brat, I made a big deal about walking by myself because I'm almost 12 years old and all my friends' parents let them walk alone. She looked at me for a long while and then told me to make sure I pay attention to cars. I got hit by a car and almost died when I was 9, so the worry that showed on her face was well warranted. I hardly nodded and headed out the door to go to school. My sister didn't like to dilly-dally, so she was always in a rush to get to school early. But seeing as it was just me, I thought it would be a good idea to take my time. I would play in the brown slush that was on the left side of the road and even make funny-looking snowballs to see how far I could throw them. Halfway to school, I noticed a white van following behind me. Being the playful child I was, if I had not been bending down to make another snowball, I wouldn't have noticed it slowly creeping up the street. I told myself I was just overreacting, but I continued more hurriedly to school. Once I got there, I took a quick glance over my shoulder and saw that the van was a few feet behind me. It wasn't until I was on school grounds that it drove away fast by me. I thought that would be the end of it, but throughout the day when I would stare out the window, the van would be there. I assumed that I never really left, just parked. Many adults would try to convince me years later that maybe it wasn't the same one, but I knew that it was. This one had a bright yellow smiley emoji sticker on it. I couldn't see who was in the van, but through the tinted glass I knew they could see me. It was now the end of the day, and I wasn't ready to go home. It was too late to call my mom because she was at work, and my sister was homesick. I had to suck it up and start walking home. I tried to blend in with a group of kids, but most of them were car riders, and the others didn't live near me. Remembering what my sister told me, I took another road home. I didn't memorize this route clearly, but I decided anything was better than being spotted by that van. I made it to my main street but realized my mistake too late. The route I took led back to the main street where I walked to school. Hidden behind a row of cars was the white van with a smiley emoji sticker. I tried to stay calm and walk past it, but once I heard the van doors slightly click open, I ran. I could hear the rush of 2 pairs of heavy footfalls behind me. They were getting closer, so I did what any normal kid would do. I cut corners. I cut into someone's backyard until I was directly inside of my house and forced myself into the thick snow to make it to the door. My heart was racing, not because I was running, but because I could still hear them behind me. I made it to the door and banged with all my might until someone came to the door. My sister looked confused, but one look in my face, and she pulled me inside and locked the doors. The van was still outside. Truthfully, it stayed out there until my brother got home. My sister and I don't talk about it, but we both knew how close it was to me going missing. I haven't thought about this incident in years, but one of my hometown friends showed me an article that came out in 2013. Apparently, some men kidnapped and sexually assaulted a girl my age. It wouldn't have scared me as much if it hadn't mentioned the white van. This happened in 2013 when I was around 12. My mom moved me and my siblings in with my grandparents because we didn't have enough money for rent at the time, and she needed to save. It wasn't a big deal though. They had plenty of room and I got to spend a lot of my time jewelry making with my grandma, which in my little eyes was such a win that I didn't even realize we were that poor. It was our little pastime after school, and one of my favorite parts was the trips we would take to Michael's to get beads and materials. Occasionally, Michael's, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is a craft store similar to Hobby Lobby, and walking around in it is a little girl's dream when it comes to DIY stuff. One day in the late fall, we realized that we had run out of wire for a bracelet that I was making for my mom, so we headed out to our local Michael's to get some. This particular day was in the winter, so it had already begun to get dark by 5 p.m. My grandma, having vision problems and a bad hip, trusted little me to run in and grab the wire and pay for it, as we had done so many times together before. I was stubbornly independent, so she wasn't very worried about me. She parked right in the handicap spot in front of the store. The sun was setting, and the light from the big storefront windows illuminated her car behind me as I walked inside. As I was standing by the display at the front, entranced by some Christmas decor or something, a man walked in through the sliding doors. I noticed him immediately. It was hard not to. He was tall, I think. I mean, I may have just been short, probably in his mid-30s with dark hair and wearing all black from head to toe. His clothes were a bit dirty, and I distinctly remember a big red D1 logo on his hoodie. He had his hands shoved in his pockets and walked briskly into the store, almost frantically. I just watched him. He made eye contact with me for a bit too long and then continued deeper into the store. I was immediately weirded out, but thought nothing else of it, and I went off to find the wire. I found my spool of wire, but getting distracted in the toy section is where I messed up. That's when I noticed him start to follow me around aisle to aisle. I would be browsing, and he would just appear at the other end, fake looking at stuff. He was muttering to himself constantly, when someone says something out loud expecting a response, but they aren't really directly looking at you. Like that, as a kid, you don't really realize what's happening immediately, so I just awkwardly walked away from him each time, pretending to not notice him. In my little brain, I reasoned that he wasn't following me, and I walked all the way across the store to the wedding aisle to look at some stuff I had seen when I first walked in. I figured there'd be no way he'd follow me there, but sure enough, while looking at the invitation cards, I get a spine-chilling feeling. I turn around, and there he is, right behind me, back to me, doing something, messing with something in his pants, doing something really vile to himself. I had never seen anything like that, and the sunken eyes he looked at me with still haunt me to this day. It took me a minute to process what I had just seen, but once I did, I immediately booked it out of the store as fast as I could, jumping into my grandma's car. She seemed startled by my sudden appearance and asked what I got. I tried to explain what had just happened when I saw him appear in the sliding door in front of us, and the dread I felt in that moment was indescribable. He approached our car, obviously recognizing I was with my grandma, and knocked on her window. I hadn't been able to explain myself in time before she cracked the window and asked him if everything was okay. The man gestured to me, that same crazy stare, and said something along the lines of, "She's a thief. She stole from the store." I was mortified on top of everything else he just put me through. Thankfully, my grandma got the same vibes I did because she politely told him to back away and rolled the window up while locking the door. He suddenly yanked at the door handle, then swung both his arms up and started banging down hard on the car's roof, causing us both to jump and me to start crying. My grandma slammed on the reverse and peeled out of there. I've never seen her drive so fast. I don't remember much after that, just the crying and holding a $177 spool of wire in my hands that I hadn't paid for. We called the police as soon as we got home, and luckily they immediately took it very seriously and requested the videotapes from the Michaels. A few weeks later, my grandma told me that they had found him. They mostly left me out of the investigation, besides taking my statement as to not traumatize me further. I guess she got the dent in her car fixed, and that was that. It wasn't until a few years later that my mom finally told me what happened to him. It turns out he already had 1 battery charge and 2 sexual assault charges on his record, one even being from a minor relative of his, like his niece or something. He had just gotten off work from the gas station across the street when he must have seen me walk into Michael's alone. I don't know what would have happened if my grandma hadn't locked her door or if she hadn't been in there with me, vulnerable to that man. So this story happened about 11 years ago. I was a senior in high school at the time, but it is the single most mind-boggling thing that I have ever experienced. It's also important to note that it happened in mid-December. I am from Iowa, and the winters here get cold at night, Like if you get stuck outside, you will die kind of cold. That plus the snowfall makes everything dead silent. You can hear anything and everything inside the house and even immediately outside of it. Well, my best friend and I were hanging out in my family's walkout basement, just having a boring winter night playing video games. We were also the only ones home. The reason it was just us is because my mother went from work straight to a bar to grab a few drinks with coworkers. So I and my friend thought it would be a good idea to break into the family wine and live a little. As we were sitting there opening up the first bottle, I heard the door to the garage open and slam shut. I immediately go, "Oh, Ma," and start looking for places to hide the bottle. My friend then says, "I thought you said your mom was supposed to be out all night." "She was," I replied. I then heard a few heavy stomps and heard my mother yell out, "Anyone home?" I yell back up the stairs, "Yep, just hanging out in the basement." I hear a few more steps move from the garage door toward the stairs, and she yells out again, "Can you come help me with something?" "I need you up here," I reply back while frantically trying to find a good place to hide the wine bottle. Yeah, give me just a minute." Then there was silence for about 20 seconds. "Anyone down there with you?" she yelled back, in a more concerned, serious tone, in a voice that was slightly off of my mother's. This was the first thing that told me something wasn't right. Our family never cared if anyone was over, as our house was a very open house to all family and friends, and the voice, it was just wrong. Like it sounded like my mother's, but it was missing something that I couldn't put my finger on. Weirded out, I backed, "Yeah, just Colton." After I yelled that back to her, I found a good place to hide the bottle and began walking up the steps to the next level. Now, as I was walking up the steps, I couldn't help but feel the overbearing silence of the house and the slight electric twinge that something isn't right. When I got to the top of the steps, I looked over to where the door to the garage is and also the kitchen right next to it, and it's black, pitch black. All the lights were off, and there was no moonlight shining through any windows. I walked over to the kitchen yelling out, "Mom, where are you?" There was no reply, just silence and darkness. I feel the electric twinge turn into full needles, and with my adrenaline kicking in full force, I had to get out of here as fast as possible. My mother was not home. I run back down the stairs, grabbing my coat along the way. "What's wrong?" Colton says. "My mom's not home," I replied as fast as I can, looking for my truck keys. "What do you mean?" "You were just talking with her?" I could now see the confusion in his face. "There's no one home. We need to leave now," I said. I took a few steps towards the back door that opens up to the yard. Then I saw my dog shaking on the couch and my cat growling behind it. I couldn't leave them. I just knew that if we left, something would happen. "Are we leaving?" Colton asked, still confused as hell. "No, I can't leave them here alone. Something is really off. I'm going to call my mom and figure this out." I pulled out my phone and called my mom, and she picked up immediately. She asked me, "What's going on?" "Mom, were you just home? I heard you yelling for me from the second level, and when I went up, you weren't there," I said frantically, hoping that she was playing a joke. "No, I'm just leaving the bar. I wasn't feeling very well. Are you okay?" "What do you mean you heard me?" I filled her in on the whole story, and she rushes home. Colton and I stayed in the basement with the animals until she got home. But before she did, you could hear something upstairs, not walking or sitting on things, but a pressure in the air, like a black hole was slowly moving from one room to the next. In the word, I would instinctively describe it as is hungry. When she got home, you could feel the thing leave just as quickly as it came, like an overbearing predatory presence had just flown away. We still have never figured out what the hell was going on, and this is just one story of many unexplainable things that have happened to us. But this is the easiest to write down, and one that I was happy to have a witness. My mother has actually passed away now, and I moved away to Arizona. Whenever I go back to Iowa and I see Colton, he still gets creeped out by what had happened. I'll never truly know what happened,